Hello, U.S. history students, and welcome to Lecture 4 of Unit 2, Reconstruction. In the last lecture, our focus was on radical Reconstruction when the Republicans took over Congress and forced the South to start abiding by some of the conditions that they had set, and how the African Americans made some pretty significant gains in terms of civil rights during this time period. Today, our objective is going to be to take a look at how Reconstruction finally came to an end in 1877, and then weigh successes and failures to determine, just how successful Reconstruction actually ended up being. In the election of 1868, which we discussed a little bit already briefly, Andrew Johnson was not all that re-electable. He was not popular within the Republican Party, especially the more radical Republicans. And so he was defeated by Ulysses S. Grant, who obviously had been a hero in the Civil War. He promised to continue radical Reconstruction if he were elected. And he was elected. I'll show you the slide here in a minute, a map that shows you the outcome of the election. Pretty handily in the Electoral College, getting most all of the northern states' votes. The southern states that came in, some of them, they didn't really like him as much. They voted for the Democratic candidate, Seymour. But his presidency, which we'll take a look at in a future unit a little bit more, was filled with corruption. And it really wasn't anything that Grant had done, but more people that he appointed. And the result was it split the Republican Party into different factions, which would weaken the party and allow the Democrats to take back some of the power that they had lost in the previous 30 years. Here's a map showing the outcome of the election of 1868. In the popular vote, Grant only had 53% of the vote, but in the electoral vote, he had 73%. You can see in the map that three southern states had yet to be readmitted: Virginia, Mississippi, and Texas. So that hurt the Democratic cause. But Grant was victorious in a majority of the states, and he was elected without much difficulty. Now, it was widely speculated that during Reconstruction there was widespread corruption in the newly established Southern government. And a lot of this was, this speculation was by Southerners who did not appreciate outsiders coming in and telling them how to run things, how to do things. This was completely different than the way things had been for them in the past. Specifically, there were two groups that the Southerners gave names to that they really didn't care for. The first one was scallywags. Scallywags were Southern men that supported radical Reconstruction. And so these were seen by conservative Southerners as traitors to the cause, and so obviously they were not going to be all that popular. The second group were known as carpetbaggers, and they were Northern Republicans who moved to the South immediately following the Civil War to take advantage of all of the problems occurring there. So they were either going down there for economic or political gain. And this time period is exemplified, portrayed by the 1939 Academy Award-winning movie Gone with the Wind.
Frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn.
And that is one of the most famous scenes from this movie. You should all go and watch Gone with the Wind. No, I will not show it to you in class, but it is an American classic, and it's a Southern view of how the war changed the South. Maybe, a little far-fetched, but again, it presents the Southern side of things during Reconstruction. And here are the two stars, Rhett Butler and Scarlett O'Hara.
You're gone, gone, gone.
And during this time of radical Reconstruction, the Old South had gone with the wind. There was no doubt about it, but as you'll see here shortly, they would make a resurgence. Finally, we need to deal with the end of Reconstruction. And as time went on, support for Reconstruction faded. There was economic concerns. The cost of keeping these troops down there, they'd been down there now for nearly 10 years. Costs of associated this with running schools, providing education for the newly freed slaves, all of these things were costly, which meant an increase in taxes. And we all know that most people don't like taxes. And so as time went on, the Republican governments that had been established lost support. People maybe have been willing to pay these taxes initially and so forth, but once the economy took a turn for the worse, then, as we're seeing today, people don't have as much money and taxes become maybe more of an issue than they had before. So in this election of 1876, it was a contentious election. You had Rutherford B. Hayes, the Republican candidate, running against Samuel Tilden, the Democratic candidate. And there was a dispute in the outcome of the election in 3 states, Florida, Louisiana, and South Carolina. The electoral votes were disputed because of maybe violence occurring to prevent people from voting and not counting the votes right and so forth. And so, according to the Constitution, when a situation like this arises, it is up to Congress to declare a winner in the election. And Congress was supposed to decide, but shockingly, they were unable to do so. And so they established a commission which consisted of 5 Supreme Court justices, 5 U.S. senators, and 5 members of the United States House of Representatives to investigate what happened and come up with a solution to this problem. And there were 8 Republicans and 7 Democrats on this commission. Now, the deal that they came up with became known as the Compromise of 1877. And it wasn't surprising that Rutherford B. Hayes, a Republican, was awarded the presidency. But now the South needed to get something in return. And in return, what they wanted was they wanted the troops to be removed from the South that had been there ever since the Military Reconstruction Act had been passed in 1867. So the troops were removed. And the result was that the African Americans had been abandoned. Once the troops were gone, this would allow the Southerners to begin harassing and intimidating and take back all the power that they had lost during radical Reconstruction. So unfortunately, African Americans had experienced some of this, but it was experienced equality and freedom and participation in government, but that was going to be short-lived. Finally, we need to take a look at the results of Reconstruction. There were some positive results that came from Reconstruction. First of all, the Union was restored in terms of bringing back the southern states. They were all brought back within this period of 10 years. The Civil Rights Amendments were passed. The 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments were ratified, made part of the Constitution, although they were ignored for a period of time. They became part of the Constitution and eventually would be abided by. Slaves were freed from slavery and recognized as citizens of the United States in most parts of the country, although the South was defiant. And probably one of the biggest results was the fact that educational opportunities were now available. African Americans could improve their social status by receiving an education. And this right would not be taken from them, although many others were. The negative results of Reconstruction basically occurred because white Southerners could not accept blacks exercising basic rights like holding office or voting. And so through violence and discriminatory voting laws, this led to fewer black votes, which allowed white Southerners to get elected again. And this basically led to a return of white democratic Southern power. And these people were called redeemers because they were going to redeem the Old South from radical Republican and black rule. So basically the deal made to bring back the Union back together was at the expense of the African Americans and their civil rights. So it's unfortunate that a political deal was made, and as a result of that, the African Americans were forced to go back basically to the way things had been in the South. Most African Americans were forced to be sharecroppers. How this worked, they were still tied to the land owners, and so the owners would provide land. They'd put a little house on there, the tools, the seeds, they'd provide that, and then the African Americans had to work the land, and as a result they were given 1/3 to 1/2 of the crop. But this didn't really provide any economic mobility for them. What it would take for that would be land ownership, and that would come a little bit later on for some of them when the government opened land in the West. So probably the biggest failure of Reconstruction was its inability to provide land ownership opportunities for the freed African Americans. And finally, the KKK emerged more powerful than ever after the end of Reconstruction and continued to intimidate and harass African Americans over the next 100 years until Martin Luther King and the Second Civil Rights Movement would emerge.